Across the history of gaming, we have a plethora of titles that are generally good, great, or amazing. But then we also have those that are timeless, incredible, groundbreaking, and just all about amazing. Games that are looked upon fondly regardless of their age. All genres have these moments come and go over the years, and in my lifetime, I've seen heaps of them, as well as getting to experience most of them firsthand, as well as enjoying them in their prime when they first got released. Gran Turismo 3, the original Halo, Gears of War, Call of Duty 4, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Vice City, Grand Theft Auto 3 and 4, and so many others. But one series has been cemented into my heart with both a speedometer and a tachometer, so that every time I feel a warm glow, or when I feel like I need to move, it is when I feel the need for speed. Need for Speed is a household name in the racing genre, in the same way as how Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Half-Life and Halo are household names in the FPS genre, or StarCraft and Command & Conquer in the real-time strategy genre. As a kid, Need for Speed was my only need, that and a packet of Doritos on the side. My earliest introduction was Need for Speed High Stakes, which took highway road racing and combined it with police chases. Its memorable soundtrack and decent selection of sports cars and supercars made it a great addition to the PS1 lineup. My second introduction was Hot Pursuit 2, which offered the same deal as High Stakes, but with better graphics, an amazing soundtrack, some of the most dynamic police pursuits ever seen in a racing game, and a wealth of content to keep you occupied. A year before Hot Pursuit 2 came out, The Fast and the Furious came out, a movie that took the same plot as Point Break and replaced surfers with street racers. Highly tuned JDMs from the 90s and 2000s revving it out and racing towards the finish line. This was where my love for cars was born. Seeing Brian's green Eclipse, Toretto's red RX-7 and Dodge Charger delved me into a rabbit hole of buying magazines from various magazines like Hot Force, Unique Cars, Muscle Cars, Street Machine, and so on. But in 2003, the game that deepened that fascination and love I had for modified cars came in the guise of a game that is not only one of the best Need for Speed games ever made, but it is also one of the greatest arcade racing games of all time, Need for Speed Underground. It was a complete transition to the stock models that we had gotten used to in the earlier Need for Speed titles. This was a game that went beyond the hood, and would show a variety of decked out cars with body kits, neons, decals and liveries, new rims and more. It was a JDM paradise in the year 2003. Almost all of the popular cars from most of the known brands would make an appearance, and could be customized to your heart's content. To put it into perspective, you take the first Fast and the Furious movie, and you take the most interesting part about it, and make a video game around it. That is Need for Speed Underground in a nutshell. Only about cars, nothing else. Just pure, illegal street racing in the dead of night. You get the intro, the promise of what's to come, and it actually delivers. Something that cannot be said for a lot of games in this day and age. From a nostalgic point of view, it was a miraculous time the first time around. But for a first-time person experiencing this, you would have to look beyond its dated visuals, something that all 2000s games suffer from, unfortunately. But once you get right into the gameplay, it still feels amazing even to this day. So let's take a dive, shall we? There's not really a story at all to be presented. The intro starts us off with the loud revving of tuned cars and spectators having an orgasm over cars they can't afford. But you're pitted into a circuit race with a souped-up Honda Integra Type R. You win, and it just turned out to be a wet dream. In fact, you're just a nobody who's only just entered the underground racing scene in Olympic City. the place where everything takes place. And now you've got to start with the bottom of the barrel for cars. It starts off pretty easy for a while. Everyone is scaled to whatever car you're driving alongside performance parts and visual upgrades. You go through precisely 111 races as well as a secret race as well, making your way through the top 10 ranks. In order to get a shot at the top racer in all events, Eddie, who drives the brown Skyline on the cover, he becomes your target for the remainder to become top dog, and through a succession of circuit, sprint, lap knockout, drag and drift races, you climb your way up. The story progression is very straightforward and honestly pretty easy for the most part. Acquiring money is never really an issue. You have money on hand where you can switch up cars on the fly that don't cost much. Most of the visual upgrades don't cost anything either, and the performance parts you buy carry over to the next car you get. So if you play your cards right, you'll never be left starving for cash. You have Samantha, who acts as your sponsor of sorts, and gives you tips on magazine companies, keeping an eye for the hottest ride, as well as lining up races for you. And as you race, you meet other rivals who are also trying to prove their worth. If you're into deep storytelling and extensive lore, then this isn't the game for you. The story is on a Diet Coke run, and it doesn't have time for any bullshit. The only priority is to race and be top dog, and that's it. The acting is pretty cringy, but in a good way. Looking back though, it has appeared to have aged worse, because the people in this game don't talk like this in real life. When it comes to stories in games, I generally prefer linear structures. It's clear and cut to the chase, whereas open world experiences tend to drag things out for an unnecessarily long time. Case in point, Need for Speed Underground 2. But the first game is quick and easy to digest, where you can take your time, or smash it out in mere hours if you're good enough. Either way, it has a great story mode with a consistent sense of progression that doesn't lag you behind, and money is always ready on hand if you need to switch things up. This is the best part about the game, the main reason why Need for Speed Underground still holds up incredibly well to this day. I've played a number of racing games even around this time, and most of them don't even hold a candle to this one. You have tight controls, a great driving engine that gives each car its own identity, advantages and disadvantages on the variety of tracks available across all 5 race types. You have circuit, a sequence of laps, lap knockout, which is circuit but with eliminations, sprint, which has a start and finish approach, so no laps. Drag is the same concept as sprint, but is much shorter, and has a shift mechanic that is dependent on timing. And drift, which is a score-based mode where you slide your car and accumulate points. Whoever has the most by the end wins. My personal favourite modes are drifting and sprinting, namely because they don't take that long and are pretty easy to manage, especially with drifting, which is the easiest mode in the game in my opinion. If you hop into a 350Z or an RX-7 in a drift race, you won't even know the meaning of defeat anymore. Circuits can be manageable but sometimes annoying as fuck, compounded with the random traffic and catch-up mechanic that turns certain opponents into F1 cars with 100% perfect handling and ludicrous speed. Drag is my least favourite. In the race, you have a meter with colour circles, indicating 4 different shifts. You clutch too early, it's a short shift, blue for good shift, and green for perfect shift. If you shift on red, then it's an over rev, which stalls the car, slowing you down quite a bit. So, if you want to be successful in drag racing, you need to go for the green circle every time, and each car has different points at where the green circle appears, so you need to watch out. And if you're too high up on the rev meter for too long, your engine blows, losing the race instantly. Same goes for hitting anything too hard, or just traffic in general. The struggle to get the right shift and the traffic cars are the worst parts about drag racing. And I've had to restart so many times that it's become a muscle memory in itself to anticipate an accident seconds before, one that I can't avoid, leading me to instantly restart. The only saving grace about drag is that it's the quickest event in the game, and it's always a relief when your clutch is on point and the opponents fuck up on their straights. In the quick race mode, you also have free run, which lets you race around the desired track, but it's not like an open world setting or anything. Just consider it a practice mode to memorize a track you're struggling with. In the story mode, when you win races, you also win a number of things depending on how many style points you've collected. which are points you get from power sliding, near misses, drafting, clear lap times, etc. Drift events give you the most, and is a fast way to obtaining various visual upgrades and bonus cars that you can use in the quick race mode. The AI in racing games can be a very tricky affair. Most of the time they're not that smart, and if your handling and cornering is on point, you'll win races with ease. To balance this out, Black Box have added a catch-up mechanic, which is commonly known in racing gaming as rubber banding. It's a system where opponents are overhauled to a point where they can go faster than you, can handle better than you, so that they have an advantage that you don't have. You begin to really feel this on the hard difficulty towards the later races, but for the first half of the game it's hardly there, and when it rears its ugly head, it's incredibly frustrating at times, making the idea of driving manual, or just being a good driver, sometimes pointless. Like you question, what's the point? When you have a car you can't even catch up with anymore after they've catched up with you and have exceeded your position. And the rubber banding aspect has led to some annoying losses on my part, but nothing to the point where it would make me quit the game entirely. Unfortunately though, this sort of system is consistent across many other racing games. It's something you're just going to have to put up with, because just about every racing game, like I said, has this sort of mechanic implemented. But what about the driving itself? Well, it's still aged incredibly well. Driving is still a ton of fun. You've got a great sense of speed with virtually every car you drive, and the handling is balanced out by the car's strengths and weaknesses. Some have better acceleration but average top speed and handling, some have great top speed but terrible handling. Ultimately, you go with the car that suits your driving style, and even then, there's not one car that feels useless in this game. They're all viable to drive, and you can even use the starter cars to beat the whole game if you wish. Of course, naturally, when I personally beat the game, I usually end it with the Skyline, which is my dream car, and it's one of the best cars in the game. Add that with the RX-7, the RSX, and the 350Z. In the performance section, you have a variety of parts to upgrade, where there's 3 tiers: Street, Pro, and Extreme. Naturally, you unlock them by winning tournaments in the campaign, but they all contribute to your overall performance. And once you have all the extreme parts, then pretty much any car is usable at this point, and it hardly makes any difference which one you choose. Physics are wonky at times, but are also very well done. Much better than the first Midnight Club, that's for sure. Ramming into traffic can make for some funny moments, but not when you're at the end of the race, or any drag race. It's near suicide to hit anything, and it really slows you down big time. But luckily it's nowhere near as bad as the Burnout games, because you do have a reset button, which you can exploit to quickly fix mistakes. But if I were you, I would make it a goal to drive as clean as possible. Trust me, you'll have a much easier time, but even then, sometimes you just cannot avoid traffic. You just can't, so expect it to happen at times. The game holds a star system, which is increased by your selection of visual upgrades from bumpers, side skirts, rims, spoilers, hoods, roof scoops, decals, paint jobs, vinyls, neons, being my favourite, and more. It's how you acquire the car magazines, which by the way I thought was cool, because they had figured out how to implement whatever car you had into the magazine itself, no matter what changes were made or what car you had. The combination of JDM custom tuning, the thrill of illegal street races, and the tight arcade gameplay is what makes Need for Speed Underground one of the GOATs in the racing genre. The only disappointment I can find is that there are no cops implemented in this game, which is something I'm sure that they had considered at the time of its development, but couldn't make up a model to add it in successfully. We wouldn't see such a thing in this style of racing games until Need for Speed Most Wanted in 2005. When you're looking at an older game in this day and age, when we've gone beyond 2003 standards, you have to be constructive but fair, and in this case, it does still look pretty good for a 2003 racing game. The models for the real-life cars are given an excruciating amount of detail, something that Gran Turismo 3 also did back in its day. But I can't say the same for the traffic or the surrounding environments. They seem to have aged worse upon a closer look. But because of the game's speed and velocity when racing, you generally ignore or don't notice these details, but they are still there, and even in spite of the dated visuals, there is still a nice amount of clarity in the environments once you have a closer look at them. You will be exposed to a variety of districts and locales within Olympic City, the fancy downtown sections, the rundown alleyways, the industrial zones, the streets full of neon signs, and oriental sections. The focus in the visual department, though, are the cars that you drive. Blackbox created like a tunnel vision using motion blur while driving, so that the detail for the car never went away, giving that same feel to the first drag race like in the Fast and the Furious. You can tell when you do the drag races and you feel the motion blur come in full force. Very few games around the early 2000s have aged well because of their art style and not so much the realistic graphics that were available at the time. Take Wind Waker for instance. But Need for Speed Underground is starting to show its age quite a bit, but not enough to the point where you have to close your eyes every time before it appears. As for the audio section, it's aged better compared to its graphical counterpart. The cars sound loud and are satisfying to hear. The tyre burning and the clutch noises also add to the thrill of gaining speed. The game's soundtrack is also a highlight, giving a variety of rock, metal, rap and electronic music that has been geared towards racing. In fact, some of the artists have had the honour of having cars made for them that you can unlock and use in the quick race mode. Too bad that you can't improve their performance though, because they are shit. Now, in regards to the game's soundtrack, while I personally love it, it is something that is dependent on the player's preferences. Licensed soundtracks are very, very difficult to do because each track may or may not, connect with the player. And in this case, it does for me because I grew up around this time, around this sort of music. And yeah, I've seen the Need for Speed Unbound soundtrack memes as well. And the thing is, if I were to play that game and put this soundtrack in, it just wouldn't work. The same way how Unbound soundtrack wouldn't work in this game. Because the soundtracks are also part of the game's identity. And with Unbound, they had a different approach to their own game. And Underground at the time, they had an approach to the game that fit the current scene. And they also had to apply the music that fit that said scene. Soundtracks are something at the end of the day that have to be a part of the game's identity in a collective manner. But lucky for me, like I've said, I love the game's soundtrack, and every track seems to fit where they belong. The iconic tracks, the mint audio design, to the already detailed cars, adds another layer to this masterpiece of a game. Need for Speed Underground is an achievement in the arcade racing genre, a JDM wet dream concentrated with Y2K energy, ludicrously riced up cars, an amazing soundtrack, a fantastic physics engine that enhances the feeling of driving and accelerating across the streets, a concise and straightforward campaign that doesn't waste your time, and much more. This game was part of what I call the golden age of the Need for Speed series, that Hot Pursuit 2 had kickstarted. It was a great time to be a PS2 owner, a car enthusiast, a Fast and the Furious fan when it was only just about the cars, or just a general lover of JDM machines. This game isn't easy to pick up nowadays, unfortunately, because of how old it is. You can, however, find used copies online, and you just have to dig for them. But I would love to see a remaster of this game with upscaled resolution, and hopefully updated graphics. But one can only dream. And to be honest, even if there was a fan project in the works, it would just get shut down quickly anyway. Sorry to say, but it is what it is. But in saying that, I can make my peace with this game, knowing that it is a timeless classic, and decades down the track, it'll still be an amazingly fun arcade racer. Need for Speed Underground is an arcade racing game done right. Thank you for watching.
Чувак, ты меня утомил. Вот тебе пару баксов, возьми такси, так ты домой быстрее доедешь. Эй, такси!